I think that people are over the balloons. Don't even get me started on that subject. But I think when we're talking about the diplomacy and Russia entering the chat of this conversation, it's being met with deep concern. That is the exact verbiage that South Korean security officials are lending to this topic of conversation when they were meeting with their Chinese counterparts yesterday to discuss their collective security concerns that affects both China and South Korea. So, interestingly enough, we have President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was asked at a May 9th news conference what he would do, how he would feel if Vladimir Putin visited Pyongyang and had this bromance moment with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un. And he was very careful. He said that South Korea actually, in the relative scheme of things, has pretty good relations with Russia. And Russia, in fact, says that of all the not-so-friendly nations, South Korea is one of the best. South Korea notably is not sending lethal munitions to Ukraine. Vladimir Putin went out of his way last week to say that to make it known that he appreciates South Korea not sending those lethal munitions. So, long story long, Yoon Suk-yeol, the president here in South Korea, is trying to walk a fine line. He's saying that a lot of these Russian moves are making him uncomfortable. They're going to try to work with Russia in areas where they can cooperate. So, a lot of deep concern. A lot of tightrope walking. We're waiting for the dust to settle, for perhaps some more clarity on whether or not this is a new autocratic version of NATO Article 5. And we're just going to have to wait over the next 24 hours how this is officially received.
All right, Mike Valerio in Seoul for us. Thanks for joining us and making clear that we are over Balloon Gate there. For joining us. First, just your response to this visit, in some sense, a historic one, given that it's been 24 years since Vladimir Putin has visited the hermit state, and yet we have no readout of what this mutual defense pledge really entails. There have been several past iterations of a similar type of pledge, the most recent in 2000, and that one, the only clause was that they would be calling each other and contacting each other in certain emergency situations. Talk about what you make of what we saw signed today.
I think this new treaty is significant. Putin visiting North Korea is significant. This burgeoning military alliance between Russia and North Korea is significant. This shows that Putin is very desperate, and he has now abandoned all hopes or any kind of, if there's no more joining the West, and wants to go out of his way to make sure that the U.S.-led international order collapses. It's a very concerning development. We've had North Koreans sending munitions, artillery shells, and other military equipment for Russia's war effort in Ukraine. We have some 10,000 containers of equipment that the North Koreans have sent to Russia. But the key question always was, how much willing is Putin able, in terms of helping North Korea? What was he going to do? Was he going to help North Korea with military sensitive technologies that's going to help North Korea's WMD program? And now with this security clause, it's now very concerning that their relationship is no longer just marriage of convenience for a little bit, where Putin is just relying on some equipment coming to Ukraine. Now they're bigger concern in terms of how much Russia can help North Korea on North Korea's WMD program.
Yeah, it does appear that Vladimir Putin has crossed the Rubicon here in trying to rehabilitate himself ever on the global stage years to come whenever the war with Ukraine does end, given this new alliance with North Korea. As you mentioned, some 10,000 containers of munitions have been transferred already, ballistic missiles also. And as you note, the real concern here is, yes, that is a short-term benefit for Vladimir Putin now on the battlefield. But longer term, do you think at this point, at this stage, Vladimir Putin is willing to transfer technological insight and know-how to North Korea? North Korea right now is in the process of developing hypersonic missiles as well. That's something that Russia has already boasted of achieving before. Is this something that should be concerning for Washington?
I think the Biden administration is very concerned about this, as the South Korean government, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. there are questions about how much really what Putin was willing to do. And there are some arguments against it, right? The munitions, the artillery shells that North Korea is providing Russia they're archaic, they're not most sophisticated kind of shells. So is Putin really willing to go as far as providing military technology, sensitive technologies to North Korea in return for this? But it's increasingly looks like he's desperate. And so we cannot rule it out. And if you recall, after Kim Jong-un visited Russia and met with Putin in September of last year, only 2 months later, North Korea successfully launched a satellite when North Korea failed to do so the previous 2 times in the past year. So even if Russians did not directly help with technology, they were certainly involved in terms of giving guidance and advice and sharing their know-how. So this is definitely a concern. I think it was intentional that the Russians and North Koreans have not explicitly stated exactly what kind of help and aid that they're talking about or transfer of technology. But Putin himself said they will share military technology. I think that was his phrase. The question is how sensitive, what kind of sensitive technology, but it is definitely a concern. And I'm sure the Biden administration is, this is one of the top concerns right now.
Yeah, and Putin's aerospace chief accompanied him on this visit, as did his energy minister as well. I'm curious, Sumi, what does China feel about this visit? How closely is Beijing watching? Because there was a time not so long ago where not only China but Russia too was working with the United States, hoping to contain North Korea to some degree in their nuclear program. Obviously, things have changed drastically here. But how is China watching all of this and interpreting it?
China is watching this very warily. They're very conflicted about this. There's also loose alignment between China, Russia, North Korea, and even Iran. But from China's perspective, on one hand, it's okay for North Korea to get some economic aid and so on from Russia because China is literally the only remaining patron. And 90% of North Korea's trade is with China. So it could use, Russia could help North Korea stabilize North Korea and help bring it up economically. And because definitely China does not want instability of the Korean Peninsula or collapse of the Kim regime. But China is definitely concerned about this burgeoning military alliance between Russia and North Korea. And it's not in China's interest for North Korea to really advance their WMD capability and perfect their weapons. Because look what's happening in the region. Right now, we have South Korea, Japan, United States strengthening their trilateral relationship, right? South Korea and Japan had always historically had very difficult and troubled relationship, but right now they're working very closely together. The Yoon Suk-yeol administration, the Kishida administration, and the Biden administration. And from China's perspective, that's also not a good development. So I think it's a very complicated mixed picture. China and North Korea relationship itself is complicated. Even though China is North Korea's main ally and patron, it's not like there's a love affair there either. There's a lot of suspicion and mutual distrust. So I think it's a very complicated picture for China, and they are watching it very, very closely.
As you noted, Seoul is watching this closely as well. Just last year, a new nuclear deterrence agreement was signed between Seoul and the Biden administration. So South Korea, not for lack of technology, but has not pursued a nuclear weapons program. Are they going to be thinking twice about that and questioning real security promises from the United States if we do see further development and alignment between Russia and North Korea on this front?
You're absolutely right. There's already been increasing talk about whether South Korea need to develop their nuclear weapons too, or at least bring tactical nuclear weapons back to South Korea. There are conservatives, there are hawks, there are people who are very concerned about that because North Korea's WMD threat has been growing in the past few years. Ever since the collapse of the Hanoi summit, North Korea has not been interested in returning to dialogue, and they've been advancing, modernizing, diversifying their missile capability, and so on. Now you add this development between Russia and North Korea, and now let's add another development in November this year. There's a presidential election in the United States. And if we have a different president, South Koreans are very concerned. Former President Trump often talked about the need to have U.S. forces in South Korea, or need to reduce our troop presence in South Korea. It's too expensive to keep them there, and so on. He made over 120 times since his 1990 Playboy interview when he talked about potentially reducing troops, or our troop presence in South Korea. So I think South Koreans are very nervous for a whole host of reasons, and it has to be in the back of their mind, even though there is they say for now that they're not going to pursue their own nuclear weapons capability. This is something that has to be on the table for the South Korean government.
This is a common thing we hear now, obviously, in Asia. We focused a lot about this same concern about trying to Trump-proof U.S. policy with regards to alliances in NATO, specifically as it relates to Ukraine as well. You brought up Donald Trump. I want to play sound from you from his national security advisor who spoke with Christian yesterday, who was really promoting the strength that Trump brought to this issue in his view, and sitting down with Kim Jong-un, viewing that as a positive. Here's what he said.
They changed tacks, and then we had some cordial diplomacy with them. And keep in mind, they promised to denuclearize. They promised to end their nuclear program on the peninsula. Now, that did in fact end up happening, and President Trump had to walk away from the Hanoi summit when Kim Jong-un tried to go back on that deal, but so we didn't have much progress after that. But keep in mind, there was no nuclear testing during the entire Trump administration because we showed strength coupled with some tough diplomacy.
What do you make of his comments?
I would say the Trump administration showed strength in 2017 when he was pursuing maximum pressure policy, and we actually got China and Russia to implement sanctions in 2017. But North Korea never agreed to denuclearize. They talked about the Singapore summit, this aspirational statement where North Koreans said they will work towards denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. They're also talking about South Korea too, not giving up their nuclear program. In any case, the whole thing fell apart. They were wildly misunderstanding each other when they showed up at the Hanoi summit. Remember, that whole thing fell apart. There was no deal to be had. And since then, North Korea has been just advancing their program. And now 2024 is not 2017, where we pursued maximum pressure policy. It's not even 2018 with summit train diplomacy. It's a very different era, different period. External environment now, this whole geopolitical environment is favorable for North Korea because China, Russia, they're not helping the United States, certainly, curb North Korea's WMD program. And Russia, by the way, just even recently, even China and Russia, they couldn't even condemn intercontinental ballistic missile launch at the United Nations. So now we have a complete impasse at the United Nations as well. So this geopolitical environment is very concerning for all of us, obviously.
Sue Mi Terry, thank you so much for joining the program. Really appreciate your expertise.